Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. You talk about music, movies, art and culture, and today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Billy Woods called Hiding Places. So I'm going to try and do something a little bit different with this Billy Woods review in comparison with previous albums I've covered from either him or his group with Elucid Armand Hammer, where for the most part I've given out some really high scores, but then a few months later, by the end of the year, I find that I just haven't revisited the albums in the same way. And let me make this clear, that can happen with more hip-hop than I would probably want to admit. It's lyrical, it's dense, it's fascinating stuff to talk about and analyze and review, and yet outside of some rare cases, a lot of the stuff doesn't tend to wind up on my year-end list or regular rotation in the same way outside of very specific moods. Now, that's not to disparage the quality. As I implied, there's going to be times that the only thing I'm going to want to hear is hyper-dense lyrical hip-hop, and I got a ton of albums I will pull in a rotation. But Billy Woods said something in the lead-up to this project that caught my attention and kind of surprised me. Namely that sometimes, from him, it's not that deep, and those who can't grasp it, they might not have the same life experiences to truly relate. And that got me thinking, because there probably is an audience who can put on a Billy Woods album at any time, and maybe I'm just not that and I gotta accept it, but it did make me consider that I might not want to overthink the newest project from Billy Woods, where he teamed up with producer Kenny Segal for 12 songs where, yes, I know, I'm late to the punch again. And while Billy Woods is saying that he's at his most direct here, well, I wasn't sure how much I bought that, but I didn't want to overthink the analysis, so what do we get on Hiding Places? So I'll freely admit, I have been sitting on this review for a little while, longer than I normally would for a Billy Woods or Armand Hammer album, I'll admit, because in taking to heart my desire to not overthink this one, Hiding Places probably became the first Billy Woods project that I actually grasped rather quickly, maybe even intuitively. But I would hesitate to call it accessible, direct, or straightforward. They are better adjectives, because this is a project that is unflinching in the pictures that it paints, with a sort of fully realized human detail that is so starkly presented, I can see most casual hip-hop fans finding this a really uncomfortable listen. Or if they're empathetic, it could be perceived as patronizing if they're not in the right mind. Now for me though, honestly, I'm not sure if it's Billy Woods' message to not overthink this, or just my growing familiarity with his style and personal tendencies, but this might be a Billy Woods album that I can revisit long term, and one that feels close to the level of Rome and really getting under my skin, and wound up being pretty great as a result, so yeah, I'm definitely going to recommend it. And it's important to start off with what Billy Woods shows on this project. I was tempted to say vulnerability, but I'm not sure that he would frame it like that, because where I've struggled with Billy Woods in the past as an MC is his penchant to wander. Not so much impressionistic in his writing to paint a picture, but his paranoia and distance and fear and slightly off-kilter mindset distorting the picture ever so slightly, then you spiraling off in weird directions. He could be kind of hard to follow, and in a sense there was a thrill to decoding his bars and steadily unpacking every nugget of wit, with the acknowledgement that you're never gonna get everything right, at least from the jump, and maybe not even from a dozen listens in. But Hiding Places, it's different. The dense layer of detail is still there, especially in images surrounding his childhood or crimes that happen, but just kind of out of frame away from him. And the blunt, apocalyptic paranoia and contempt for the broken systems, that's all the more evident. But if Paraffin by Armand Hammer was the first glimpse of the humanity that informed some of these views, Hiding Places paradoxically places so much more of it in plain sight. And while there are points that show how Billy Woods might be at his most comfortable in the spider holes and the crawl spaces, over stuff with forgotten papers and hyper-detailed memories and anything that could be useful someday but is generally useless right now, this is the album that shows glimpses of how and why he might have become like that, and this is the gut punch you don't see coming, because the roots can feel so, well, ordinary. For anyone, and that matters, because on earlier projects it can be very easy to place Billy Woods' brand of esoteric, uncomfortable weirdness just out of frame, especially in his more apocalyptic, doom-saying moments. Deep down, you know he's probably right about how and why society systems might cave in, and that guys like him, who probably know how to survive, they're gonna be the ones that last the longest. And while Paraffin forced the look at the human consequences, there was a manufactured distance through a lot of his lyrical style. With Hiding Places, Places, that distance is removed given how plain-spoken, relatively speaking, that he is. And you come to the realization that Billy Woods isn't that far removed from anyone in his experience. And that makes his experiences and anxieties hit way closer to home, especially surrounding poverty, both growing up and now. It's always been a factor shading a lot of his stories, especially on Paraffin, but the experiences here are much more sharply defined and personal in the framing. And they'd almost be funny if they weren't gut-wrenching in their truth, both from his excavated past and now. The encounter with someone doing way worse than you on steak knives, where to them, even the thought of getting something for second place could mean the world. Or the monologue at the end of Speak Gently surrounding how, if you're poor, you don't get your mail forwarded, leaving all the more artifacts of capitalism's flailing grip behind you. And there's the devastating decline of insurance on Big Fake Laugh, where the John Q approach in order to get something back out of the healthcare system, it's not an option, especially if you're trying to rebuild something from the very bottom and you have to rely on those systems. And then there's a day in a week in a year. Might be one of the most heartbreaking songs that Billy Woods has ever made, the one that really got to me, the centerpiece of the album, where the illusions of conquering the broken system, they're ripped away, as are any illusions that he's going to find his way out of it, or be able to survive without it in some variety, or be able to control it. And the questions they're left unanswered. The desperate crack fiends in the gutters, they hit their pipes with tears streaming down their faces. He lets the car spin out in black ice to show how little control he really has. And at the end of the day, he feels like the kid without any money in the arcade, with his hands on the joystick and the buttons, just pretending that he's playing. And what's telling is that sense of subtle empathy is so poignant across this album. At the end of the day, he's got to eat. He wants to be left alone. He wants to hold his family dear, honor his traditions. A hard reality when you're that poor and your necessary defenses can lead to some bloody consequences along the way that the system is prepared to punish. But he doesn't really want to disparage those who want the same as he does. And he might look to that system as the answer. I mean, to them, or at least for now for him, it might be the answer. And it means that while this album can get kind of unsettling and bleak, it doesn't precisely feel crushing or altogether uncompromising. He knows that people want to go into the matrix on crawl space even despite everything it is and what defines it, and even he calls himself on the disgust of the corruption that he'll see, knowing his culpability in it. But there's almost something kind of childlike and innocent and almost potent in his honesty and emotional responses, and seeing the bigger picture and how flimsy some of those systems can be for those who really need them. The bombs dropping on July 3rd on SpongeBob, though God promised never again for this brand of annihilation. The reckoning promise and a possible different life that are foretold on bedtime, otherwise known as bedtime stories. And when considered how much hip-hop embodies a similar structure and capitalistic system in S.H.I.E.L.D., we got songs like Checkpoint and Toothy, the sad necessity of the violence on Red Dust, which isn't so much different than what was there decades ago, and then the striking hook on Spiderhole, where he doesn't want to see the gentrification of words from Nas or the real poverty that are a product of capitalism, not for its cheap branding to exploit, even as he himself acknowledges that he'll have to play in the game to survive in the end, at least for now, and that's dehumanizing too. It's territory he was in on Paraffin, but the framing places things much closer for now, and that's all the more striking and revelatory. He's much more easier to empathize with on this project. And now, that's still a lot going on, not even touching on the reams of intricate detail and detritus that surrounds the album that you would think would render it, like most Billy Woods or Armand Hammer projects, a little bit claustrophobic. And the strange thing is that it's not. I've been familiar with Kenny Segal's production for some time. He did work with Open Mike Eagle and Milo and the Jefferson Park Boys. I put him in my regular rotation. But his production for Billy Woods is more crackling and spare, giving Billy Woods' gruffer tone plenty of room to echo and muse across the muffled guitar tones, and the mix has got some slightly cleaner textures. And when I say that, I mostly mean that for once Billy Woods' vocals come through as clear as ever and aren't actively fighting for air in a pretty dense mix, which can make certain words hard to make out, which I definitely consider a plus here. Although there are a couple songs with a clash between some smoother synth tones and mixes that crackle with more organic texture or muffling the guitars and bass, that can get a little bit jarring, like how the synth balances against the muffled guitar and checkpoints. And for a project that tends to feel as ponderous and heavy given the tempo of these beats, even on the shorter cuts, you get a lot of time to take in places where it doesn't work. Like the first half of Crawl Space against Eloose's verse before the song kind of collapses into something a lot more hollow and and dark, or how the oddly upbeat guitar pickup is a weird clash with a creepy density on Toothy. Hell, you want to talk about density, the first third of Speak Gently, it almost feels like an uncommon NASA production with the careening guitars crashing against the heavier percussion before the song just decomposes before your eyes. We'll through a lot of Self Jupiter's verse, which I really liked, and Billy Woods' musing outro as it all comes apart and people don't know what to do. And now, all this being said, I do appreciate how effectively many of these productions will shift and warp into each other. The transitions from the melancholic crackles of the verses to Mother Mary's husky hook against the damp wiriness of the synths on a day and a week and a year, it's a testament to that. And while I wouldn't say Billy Woods precisely has hooks on this album, there are more choruses that stand out more than I expected. The bark of SpongeBob before the muffled guitars crash through, a similar approach taken with the piano embellishments on Spiderhole, the rather squonking hook on Big Fake Laugh and Steak Knives. It almost seems to take a bit of a jazzy approach in the former in the arrangement. It also pops up on Bedtime in the second third of Speak Gently, but by the time we get the shaken cymbals and the off-key emptiness of Red Dust, which you typically hear in a lot of the keyboards and some of the synth effects that drift across these mixes, you're left with a project that doesn't quite collapse in on itself, but the strain of holding it all up is evident. And there's an empty space where, within the tones, they might be a little muffled, but they are there, and those who create them are there too, and they still echo. So as a whole, yeah, I probably overthought this one too, but Billy Woods delivered one of his most straightforward, haunting, and emotionally gripping projects to date, at least for me, just as lyrical and thought-provoking, but revealing of enough of his personal experiences and life and emotionality to draw me in more than ever. More than ever before, it feels like his stories are framed in a way to challenge the audience on multiple fronts, not just with pure bars, but with the deeper, understandable content as well. And it feels like more chances were taken by him as an artist to get there. And I think they worked. More than most, I can see this being a Billy Woods album that will stick with me a lot longer, and maybe even with larger audiences, which is why I'm giving this an 8 out of 10 and a serious recommendation, especially for those who might have been on the fence about Billy Woods before. It's a tough album to digest, for sure, but he's shown the spaces where he is, and they aren't that far removed from you and I. Hell, with every reason as he has to hide, more than ever, he's in full view. Gotta respect that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm always surprised how long these particular reviews turn out to be, and again with this one, I hope to God I got some of it right. But hey, if you want to buy or stream the album, links down there below. And I got the poll up there. I am curious where you guys fall on this. Billy Woods is a bit of a different animal, and I know this album, I think it's probably his most straightforward to date. I'd struggle to call it accessible because it will get under people's skins, but again, it's really damn good. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys are asking where Billboard Breakdown is, the link over here is in the title card. It's on a new channel. I've been putting up the past couple episodes there. That's where it's going to be from now on. Please go subscribe over there. I'd be very grateful for you guys to stay on board. Until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.